I'm just going to show you this thumbnail really quick, just to give you an idea of what we're about to read. Because this is kind of a long one here, so you're going to have to stick with me for it. Hope everyone's enjoying the episode. 113 in the chat. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining me. Hope you're enjoying the information so far. Just wanted to show this real quick. This is the thumbnail I made. Ancient Tennessee, Tolkien's real Middle Earth. Yeah, y'all know I love Tolkien. Going through the Silmarillion right now with my 9-year-old. Read that when I was probably 12, so it's pretty cool to kind of have kids and get to go back through this stuff. Here we go. Back to the article. Again, this is Antiquities of Tennessee, 1820. Okay, 1820. I love the really old ones. Finding juice back then, it's tough. It is. It is. Believe me. The percentages are very, very small beyond 1850. Uh, the quote gold rush. I do believe that something else happened in the 1840s, 1830s, because again, stuff is very scant in that time frame. But yeah, this is a long one. Okay, and remember what I showed you on the thumbnail is Tennessee Tolkien's Middle Earth, and why this is applicable here to this article. On the farm of Turner Lane Esquire, 5 miles southeast of Sparta, on the waters of the Canny Fork of Cumberland, and on other farms adjacent, have lately been found small graves sunk into the earth from 1 foot to 18 inches below the surface. They are about 10 inches broad and 18 inches long, having a flag limestone rock at each of the ends and sides and covered with the same species of rock. In these graves are found skull bones about 3 inches in diameter, nearly sound, and other bones being proportionably small. Between 200 and 300 of these graves have been discovered. In every tomb yet opened was found a small black earthen pot, about 1 pint in capacity, containing a small conch shell, decayed, of a gray color on the exterior and red within, and a transparent as this species of shell is usually found. The pot was unbroken. It exhibits numerous white speck of round, shiny particles. It is a matter of striking curiosity that there is not to be found in the neighborhood of this place any limestone of the same species with that of which these tombs are constructed. In the vicinity of the place where these graves are found, there are the vestiges of a large town, having parallel streets extending east and west. The land they are upon is covered with a large timber, as any in the neighborhood. The sutures of the heads of these skeletons, are closed and as sound as solid as other parts of the skull. So basically, I don't know if he goes on to correlate that, but basically the sutures of the skull, right? This means that we're dealing with an adult. So this is a very, very small person. If you were listening closely and hearing me talk about pygmies and stuff, you're going to see why. This is the sutures of the skull were closed. This is an adult. The sutures stay a bit spread open with gaps as the child's brain grows and the head develops rather quickly. And that slows down quite a lot in the teenage years, and by 20s, and again, we're dealing with different types of human, quote unquote human, and quite different skeletal structures for all of these people. But that's an important thing to keep in mind of. And Mr. Anderson's 2.5 miles in a southwesterly direction from the farm of Mr. Lane were found other skeletons of the same dimensions, in tombs constructed upon the same plan of a similar material. One, at least it is said, was observed to have teeth in all the bones belonging to the human body. The facts above stated are attested by Mr. Lane of White County, who has seen the skeletons very often, by his son Jacob A. Lane, Esquire of Sparta, in the same county, and by other son Alexander Lane, Esquire, student at law, who all say they can be verified by all the inhabitants in the vicinity of the farm of Mr. Lane. Mr. Lane, the father, who is a man of observation, gives it as his decided opinion that these are the skeletons of adult persons. Okay, perfect. So he does say it. He found his opinion, Fons, Founds, Founds. His opinion on the solidity of the bones of the heads, like he was stating with the sutures above, and also upon the fact of the sutures of the skull being entirely closed and solid. Perfect. So I just talked over myself there. The trees growing where they were found are as great a size and an age as any in the surrounding forest. Both at Mr. Anderson's and Mr. Lane's are many extensive circular elevations of earth raised 2 or 3 feet above the common surface, arranged in order, having the very appearance of once populous towns upon which are standing large trees. So fantastic. He's saying town. This is a buried town. They talked about streets going east and west, and they were perfectly straight, left and right of each other, right? Right angles. Now he's talking about mounds of what he would call having the appearance of what's populous towns with large trees growing on top of them. The small graves at Mr. Lane's are arranged, but at Mr. Anderson's there is a large burying group full of them without any order as to position. That the bones are human, Mr. Lane thinks there can be no doubt, and that they are not the bones of children. Really important distinction to make. So we're dealing with a very, very small. I mean, what did he say earlier? I apologize. Let's go back. 13 inches, 18 inches, 18 inches, you guys. Adults. We'll get into some bigger ones here as we go along. The conch shells, it would seem, must have been brought from the borders of the ocean, as there are none to be found either in the rivers of Kentucky or those of this state. And it would also seem that they must have been brought hither immediately before their disposition in these vessels. In a few years, again, we're talking about that trading culture, right? It's vast. In a few years, they probably would have been lost or broken to pieces had they remained unburied. That the animals the skeletons belonged to drank water and were not sucklings is intimated by the water vessels at the head of each skeleton. The rocks which enclose them are thin blue limestone and not of that neighborhood originally, all the limestone in the vicinity being of a gray color. Here is a mystery that baffles conjecture and puts all experience at defiance. The pygmies of Herodotus on the borders of Ethiopia and the Red Sea and those of Homer in India have always been treated as fables. Now, I've shown that it was America called Ethiopia. There's definitely evidence for it. Did Solomon and have was the story of Solomon here in America is definitely possible. There's a lot of very interesting overlays. Now, the Red Sea was also the Sea of California, or Baja was also called the Red Sea. You go back on old enough maps, and India is India, or America is India. In fact, North America is India superior, and India, as we know it today, a separate India inferior. I've also shown maps that call the Mississippi Valley Cathay, and the areas west of the Mississippi are labeled land of the pygmies. I've shown this map several times. And that Chicago was the capital of Cathay, the White City. Now, Chicago was called the White City, and Peking's also called the White City. Lots of interesting overlays. At this day, we must outstrip credulity itself to believe in a real existence of pygmy men. How could a nation of pygmy men, not exceeding 18 inches in stature, build habitations, clear the forest, cultivate the soil, defend themselves against the ravages of the hawk and the eagle, the wolf, and the panther? How live in a world of giants, such as are mentioned by ancient writers, when the size and age of men, bearing a just proportion to each other, far exceeding those of present day? So they're talking about, the 10-footers that I've mentioned several times. The remains of a gigantic race are not more than 7 miles from the bearing of these pygmies. Their skeletons are not shorter than 7 feet, frequently above it. Figure and imagination one of these skeletons covered with muscle and distended by ordinary repletion. Place him on the side of the largest man of present day, and what would he be? What would his comparative appearance? The place where the larger skeletons were buried is covered with trees of no less magnitude and age than where the smaller ones are found. They are therefore brought to a simultaneous existence, or at all events to periods not very distant from each other, was the smallest child of a giant of a size of diminutive as the small skeletons. Now, they already stated that these definitely weren't children, that these pygmies, now as they're saying, were living side by side in the same era as these giants, who the giants at their shortest were 7 feet, often far taller. Did the Samoyed of America, whose common stature does not exceed 4 feet, and whose female, it may be supposed, is still of inferior size, come hither from the northeastern coast of America in company with the people of Scythia, remarked by all writers of antiquity for their monstrous size? This is really important. Did they come here with the Scythians? Ooh. Let me know in the chat what you think of this article because this is just one of my favorites. That in their passage through the neck of land, which is supposed connects the two continents together, those Scythians dragged with them some of the dwarfish nations of the northeastern America, whose descendants are now found living within the Arctic circles, and that these small skeletons are the records, the relics of the pygmy race, who posterity, by the general warmth of a milder climate and the plentiful diet which it affords, have returned to the stature with their immediate ancestors lost. So what they're trying to say is that the climate somehow has supported them to grow into larger people. And this is ridiculous. Again, we've shown that as you go farther back, the things become tropical. So we've migrated away from that. We're not getting closer to that. But these guys are trying to hypothesize some way of answering that these people weren't already here, or that they don't ever already have some kind of cultural establishment, that they're not migrants. The Scythians and what the Scythians represent, they absolutely have a foothold here, going back thousands of years, not not one generation, right? And how incredible is it, again, that when we talk about layer by layer, that these people are found not far below the surface? Obviously, we're talking about a people predating the quote Native Americans, and possibly a culture predating the mound builders, or right alongside them. It's hard to say for sure because not all parts of the country are affected in such catastrophic ways to show huge delineations and surface level changes and so on and so forth. So don't know for sure, but they definitely predate the Native Americans, as we would call them. And the Scythian overlay is really important because we're going to make more correlations as we go through this to the Scythians being here in Texas and that are Tennessee, and that they were uh, intimately connected with these advanced constructions. Where was I? Chilling. So now they're talking about that the colder climate chilled the blood, diminishing the force of circulation and rendering their supply of food precarious and unwholesome in the lapse of a long series of ages, reduced their primitive bulk. That's how he's wanting to describe how these pygmies became so small. Now, that's ridiculous because some of the oldest pygmy cultures in the world are found along the equator, so that doesn't hold at all, at all, at all, at all. Right? The pygmies that we know of today that are still, you know, functioning and have a culture, that are found all along the New Guineas, Papua New Guinea. Um, it's like 90 degrees year round, so and they have plenty of food. That has nothing to do with it. But this guy's postulating. He's ending all these with question marks. He's just like, how do we explain this? Because he's just dumbfounded. If this be so, the women and the ungrown children of the first immigrants, although beyond the age of infancy and not yet arrived at maturity, might not have been of larger dimensions when clothed with flesh than is indicated by these skeletons. Just imagine how you would feel as an anthropologist, archaeologist, scientist in this time period in the 1800s, and you're finding full burial plots of people that are 18 inches tall. They're adults. You can't say, oh, they shrunk because it was cold. It's ridiculous, right? And alongside, just literally a town over, they have giants buried below the surface with the same types of trees of the same age growing on top of them. They're saying that they had to have lived together, and these giants, the shortest being 7 foot, often much taller. How you would feel The fact that this even gets written about is what makes it so amazing and why I love these old newspapers. Let us look for conch shells on the shores of the northeastern America, and look there also for the stature of those who inhabit the most northwardly regions of these countries, and we shall perceive whether this conjecture has the continence of probability. And if not, then let it be owned with candor that many are the unsearchable ways of providence, absolutely unexplainable. At least, basically, what he's saying is that yeah, our history has no evidence of these people. Interesting, isn't it? You know, the Catholics have removed a lot of culture. And I've been saying for quite a long time that the pygmies existed in great numbers here in America, but I've never had a really great substantiation like this one, where they're this small, 18 inches. That's incredible. That's insane. But indeed, a conjecture may be offered before we leave this subject, which in some may possibly be worthy of attention. Okay, this is also, how could it get better? Well, it's going to get better. The Egyptians in ancient times worshipped a great number of animals, among others, the ibis, the hawk, the cat, the dog. Now I've shown, uh, Kudimeo has shown, shout out Kudimeo, that the ibis, the hawk, the cat, the dog, the cultural representations, not only Egyptian, but have their Mayan footholds as well as Aztec, are of creatures that existed and were more than likely the original representations of these creatures here in America. In whatever family a cat died, every individual of that family cuts off his or her eyebrows. But if a dog died, the whole family shaved their head, and in fact, every part of their body. The cats, when dead, were carried to sacred buildings, and after being salted, were buried in. I can't read it. I'm sorry, it's blurry. Were buried in this something behasts. Of the canine species, the females were buried in consecrated chests, which ceremony was only observed with respect to the Jonhuman, Herodotus, something, something. Now we've shown the correlation between the dog and the cat, and the overlays with the Mayan culture is pretty nuts. And not everyone, but for those who aren't familiar, there's plenty of material out there about how the Egyptians held the dog and the cat sacred, and the domestication of animals, as I've shown historically, is found all throughout here, the American Southwest, American West, East, everywhere. Mexico, especially, and South America. Mummified cats, mummified dogs, they exist all over the quote Americas. The Hindus say the Abdothis pay honor and worship less or more solemn to almost every living creature, whether quadruped, bird, or reptile. He then gives a long list of the worshipped animals, being with the ape, including the dog and other animals. The ape is the class of animals which receives the highest honors. The striking resemblance which the Hindu remark between this animal and man in exterior appearance and physical relation was the first cause of the great reverence in which they held him. The worship of the great ape, Hanuman, extends over all the territory of India, and especially among the followers of Vishnu. His idol is everywhere seen in the temples and other places frequented by the people, and it is also frequently found in the woods and under thick trees in desert places. But particularly where the Vishnuites abound, the favorite idol of Hanuman is found almost everywhere. The sacrifice offered to it usually consists of the simplest production of nature, and in parts frequented by apes. Devotees are often seen who give them part of their food and consider it a meritorious deed. The skulls and other bones described by Mr. Lane may be the bones of sacred animals, buried by a superstitious not dissimilar to that of the Hindu and Egyptian. Now, here we have a man who's saying, oh my goodness, no, not only were these pygmies buried. So, what he's saying is that there was a jar. I don't know if you missed it. There was a jar of ashes and bones buried at the head of the pygmy. Okay. And in that, they were finding animal remains. Now, he's correlating that perhaps these different and they were all different. They were birds, they were dogs, they were cats, they were monkeys. So now he's correlating it to, man, the only other people that do something like this are the Hindu races and the Egyptian. Hmm. Should this conjecture be found worthy of adoption, the evidence of Hindu ancestry will have attained a degree of strength almost too stable to suffer resistance. Of course. Yep. Again, India's superior is where? The animal, whether ape or monkey, and the conch shell may have come from the Gulf of Mexico. Cumana, or the waters of Orinoco, and the adjacent countries, whether it is probable they came from the Old World. No, this is the Old World, with the superstition which defied them. So the sedulous anxiety manifested for their preservation, the care taken in their burial to provide a certain species of stone for the coffin and for their future accommodation, a water vessel and a dipper for circumstances which must have proceeded from some inviolable and indispensable religious injunction, the very same, perhaps, which governed the conduct of the ancient Egyptians and of the ancient, intermediate, and present Hindus. Powerful. Thanks for sticking with me. That was a long one, but man, worth every second. Now, what is he saying, right? We'll sum it up real quick. He's saying we have pygmies no taller than 18 inches, buried in advanced stone coffins with funerary stone, um, with stone um, containers at their heads with different animals inside of them. And here we are, right? 1820. He's saying, well, I want to quote him perfectly here. Should this conjecture be found worthy of adoption, the evidence of Hindu ancestry will have attained a degree of strength almost too stable to suffer resistance, perhaps which governed the conduct of ancient Egyptians and of the ancient Hindus. Boom. Powerful, right? Where is Egypt? Where is Egypt? Remember, correlating again all these episodes back through, they're stealing relics and they're shipping them to Europe and they're building that Egypt was in the Nile. Now, I'm not saying there was an advanced race in the Nile. Definitely not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that they've been mixing shit up and moving it all over to different parts of the world, and they got our heads spinning. And you go far enough back, and this is a time period where that narrative, didn't hold much strength, but the old world was still considered, Babylon, Mesopotamia, so on and so forth. And yeah, he's basically like, well, this evidence. I mean, I don't. This evidence is telling me that these are Egyptian or Hindu pygmies living with giants, living with Scythian giants. They must have came all the way across the land bridge. That whole land bridge thing is just ridiculous. Are there people that migrated across that? Probably, but we're dealing with a culture so advanced in mercantile seafaring exchange that the idea that they wandered for 50 years across the Bering Strait is just ridiculous.